Here's the latest on the war in Iran. CENTCOM says the U.S. intercepted 2 Iranian ballistic missiles last night. They were reportedly targeting American forces based in Kuwait. CENTCOM says the missiles were shot down immediately. No American soldiers were hurt. Retired 4-star General Jack Keane joins us now. All right, General, another attack. How should the U.S. respond?
Well, they did. I mean, it was a defensive measure for sure. And what has been happening here for several weeks is Iran's persistent and continuous violation of the ceasefire, particularly in the Straits and the Gulf area here. And what they're doing is trying to interfere with shipping, for sure. They were going to fire a couple of drones to do that. We took those drones out, and then we took down the guidance system that helps to target them. And then they shot down one of our long-range drones that was up, MQ-1. It was in international waters, and after that, we took a defensive measure and took down the air defense system that brought down that drone. And then we also went a little further with the command and control that supports that. So the Iranians have been violating the ceasefire that began on April the 8th quite continuously. And when it comes to what's taken place in Lebanon, it is outrageous what they're doing. That ceasefire began on April the 17th, and for our audience to understand, since April the 17th to now, the Iranians have fired 2,400 or so missiles and drones into northern Israel in that short span of time. Quite outrageous violation of the ceasefire, to be sure. That exceeds, this is Hezbollah firing into northern Israel, backed by Iran. Every single missile and rocket that they're using came from Iran. And the reality is, during the 5 weeks of the war, which began on February the 28th, the Hezbollah are firing more drones at northern Israel now than Iran fired at Israel during those 5 weeks, and is supposedly under a ceasefire. So we actually have justification right now to go back into military operations. The president is certainly full aware of that. And what he's thinking is he's trying to get the best deal that he can from the Iranians, knowing full well that this may be some indication of how serious are they about going into a deal that would be somewhat permanent. So the reality is the president has not taken off military operations in terms of a deal falling through. And I think the Iranians, Stuart, are kind of thinking something else. They're thinking they play this out over time, 60 days, 90 days, that likely the president will not reattack, even if the Iranians don't come through and make an adequate deal. And I think they're miscalculating.
Well, look, there are reports that Iran's negotiating team is stopping message exchanges with the U.S., and they're stopping these exchanges because of Israeli attacks in Lebanon. Am I right in saying that Iran wants the attacks on Hezbollah to stop in any peace deal, and we will not agree with that? And we're not going to be able to restrain Netanyahu. He's already going to attack the suburbs of Beirut.
Well, why would we even think about restraining them? I just said what's happening. We're not initiating attacks. The Hezbollah has struck into northern Israel 2,400 times in just several weeks. That's offensive action. The people in those villages are no longer living there and in those towns. Around the Sea of Galilee, and I was there several months ago, all those villages and towns are evacuated. Northern Israel, in a sense, is evacuated. Israel can't let that stand. That's a small state to begin with. We can't let Iran impose that on us. And we're worried about Israel's retaliation? Does that at what level does that make any sense? Well, Israel has every right to retaliate here.
How come there are 2,000 missiles launched at Israel? I thought we'd been told that we'd vastly reduced the number of drones and missiles that Iran was capable of firing, but now they've got 2,000 into Israel?
This is Hezbollah coming from Lebanon, and we didn't conduct any military operations in Lebanon. And it's about over 1,000 missiles and about 1,400 or so drones to come to the number of 2,400 missile and drone attacks since April the 17th. And Israel has every right they're abiding by the terms of the agreement, which is they must stay in a defensive mode. They have to stay stationary, and they're more vulnerable inside of Lebanon. But certainly they have every right to do anything they can against this onslaught of these missiles. And so what Netanyahu is doing, he's expanding his operation inside of southern Lebanon and attacking north of the Litani River to go after these rockets and missiles and operations centers and the command and control of all of that. He's got every right to do that. And people that are suggesting there's something wrong here, well, yeah, there certainly is. It's 2,400 attacks into northern Israel under a ceasefire.
Yep, and every right to go after that and stop it. General Jack Keane, always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us, sir. Appreciate it. See you again soon.
Yeah, great talking to Stuart.